I came home that evening, exhausted from work, dragging my feet toward the front door, already picturing the moment I'd collapse on the couch to hear the laughter of my children. That laughter was always my reward after a long day, the purest sound in the world. But instead of laughter, instead of giggles and happy voices, I opened the door to the sound of muffled sobs. My heart clenched instantly. I dropped my bag right there in the hallway and followed the sound, every step heavier with dread. When I reached the living room, I saw them, my babies, my sweet kids, sitting on the floor, their cheeks wet with tears, surrounded by boxes, their toys, their books, even their blankets were thrown together as if they had been evicted from their own home. My oldest tried to wipe her tears and look strong for her younger brother, but the pain in her eyes nearly broke me in half. My youngest clutched a stuffed animal to his chest, whispering, "Why don't they want us here? Mommy, what did we do wrong?" I spun around, confused and furious, and that's when I saw my parents standing in the hallway, looking strangely calm, as if nothing about this scene was wrong. My mother folded her arms across her chest, and my father cleared his throat like he was about to explain some logical decision. "Don't overreact," my father said coldly. "We simply moved their things downstairs. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. I snapped, my voice shaking. Why are my kids crying? Why are their rooms emptied? What the hell happened while I was gone? And that's when the words came, the words that would burn themselves into my memory forever. My mother looked at me with that same dismissive glare she had given me so many times as a child and said, "We needed the upstairs rooms for your nephew. The golden grandson deserves the best, and those rooms were wasted. Your children will be fine in the basement." For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. My ears rang. I looked at her face, then at my father's, waiting for some sign that this was a joke, some cruel attempt at humor. But they were dead serious. They had taken the bedrooms from my children, shoved their belongings into boxes, and relegated them to the basement, like second-class citizens in their own home. All because my sibling's child, their precious golden grandson, was more deserving. I looked back at my children who were still crying, confusion and humiliation written across their small faces. My daughter whispered, "Mommy, do we have to sleep in the basement now?" Her voice cracked, and it was like someone had taken a knife and twisted it deep inside me. I crouched down, gathered them into my arms, and whispered, "No, baby. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. You belong here. These are your rooms. You did nothing wrong." But even as I said the words, rage was bubbling inside me, hotter with every passing second. Memories began to resurface, flooding me like a tidal wave, memories I had buried deep because they were too painful. I remembered being their child, standing in the same house, hearing the same dismissive tone. I remembered being told to stop crying when my sibling got praised for the smallest thing, while my achievements were ignored. I remembered having my toys handed down to my sibling because they needed it more, even though it was mine. I remembered feeling invisible, unloved, unworthy. And now, here it was again, only this time it wasn't me, it was my kids. My innocent children were living the same nightmare I thought I had escaped. My parents hadn't changed. They hadn't learned the favoritism, the cruelty, the blatant disregard. It was alive and well, poisoning another generation. I stood up, my fists trembling, and faced them. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice low and dangerous. "How dare you put your hands on my children's things? How dare you make them feel unwanted in their own home? How dare you repeat the same garbage you did to me? Only this time to them?" My mother rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. They'll be fine. Children are resilient. Besides, your nephew needs the space more. He's special. He's destined for big things. You should be proud he's in this house." My father added, "Yes, you're overreacting again. Always so emotional. You should be grateful we let you stay here at all. Remember, this is our house, Our rules, that word, our, hit me like a slap. Yes, the house belonged to them, but my children and I lived here too. We had built a life here, filled these walls with laughter, tears, birthdays, homework, and bedtime stories, and in one afternoon they had ripped it apart. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the storm rising inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tear down the smug looks on their faces. But when I glanced back at my kids, I knew I couldn't let them see me break. I had to stay strong, not for me, for them. So I gathered the boxes one by one, carrying them back upstairs with shaking hands. My parents muttered behind me, complaining, mocking, but I ignored them. Each trip upstairs felt like reclaiming a piece of dignity for my children. My daughter followed me, helping carry her books and stuffed animals, her small hands trembling but determined. My son clutched his blanket like it was a lifeline, watching me with wide, tear-stained eyes. Inside me, something shifted that night. Something hardened. Something woke up. I realized this was more than just favoritism. This was war. A war for my children's place, their worth, their dignity, and I would not lose as I tucked them into bed later, smoothing the blankets over their little bodies. I whispered a silent promise in my heart. You will never feel what I felt. You will never question if you are loved. You will never beg for scraps of attention from people who can't see your worth. I will protect you, even if it means standing against my parents, especially if it means standing against them. I kissed their foreheads and turned off the light, but sleep never came to me that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words of my mother echoing over and over in my head. The golden grandson deserves the best. And I thought to myself, if they believe that, if they truly think my children don't deserve better, then they are about to learn just how wrong they are. Because that was the night I decided enough was enough. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my body restless, my mind boiling. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories came. Memories I thought I had buried, memories I had sworn never to revisit. But now they demanded to be seen. The sobs of my children earlier in the evening echoed in my ears. Their tiny voices, trembling with confusion, brought me back to a different time, a time when I was the one crying in this very house. A time when I was their age, too small to understand why my parents looked at me with disappointment while looking at my sibling with pride. I remembered one birthday in particular. I must have been 8 years old. I had been waiting all week for that day, dreaming of a cake, a gift, maybe even a party. I had drawn little invitations on pieces of paper for my dolls, imagining they were my friends. But when the day arrived, I woke up to silence. No balloons, no decorations, no smell of cake in the oven, nothing. Instead, I found my mother in the kitchen, her arms full of shopping bags. She was humming as she unpacked shiny toys, a stack of clothes, and a birthday cake, except it wasn't for me. It was for my sibling. But Mom, I whispered, tugging at her sleeve, it's my birthday today. She looked down at me like I was an inconvenience. Don't start with your drama. We're combining your birthday with your brother's. His is tomorrow, and it's more important. He has so many friends coming. We can't throw 2 parties. It's too much. I swallowed hard, the sting in my throat burning. But can I at least blow out the candles too? She rolled her eyes. Don't be selfish. Let him have his moment. That evening, I stood in the corner while everyone sang to him. They handed him the knife to cut the cake, piled gifts into his lap, and cheered his name. And me, I got a slice of the cake after everyone else, with frosting already smeared, and a pat on the shoulder, as if I were a guest at someone else's celebration. That was the night I realized in this house I was invisible. Another memory flashed, sharp and painful. I was 12, standing on stage at school. I had just won first place in the spelling bee. I was shaking with excitement, clutching my certificate. I ran home, bursting through the door, holding it high like a trophy. Dad, look, I won. My father barely glanced up from his newspaper. That's nice, he muttered. But when my sibling came home an hour later with a ribbon for participation in soccer, my parents jumped to their feet. They clapped, cheered, hugged him, and even called relatives to announce his achievement. I sat at the kitchen table that evening, my certificate lying flat and forgotten, while my brother sat on my father's lap eating ice cream. Everyone laughing. I never brought home another award after that. What was the point? Even worse were the nights I cried into my pillow, wishing just once they'd say, "We're proud of you." But those words were never meant for me. And now here I was, decades later, watching my own children's tears soak into their little pillows because history was repeating itself. My parents hadn't changed. They had only found a new golden child to worship, my nephew, and my children were being pushed aside just like I had been. The anger inside me deepened into something else, something heavier. It wasn't just rage, it was grief. Grief for the little girl I used to be, the one who never got her candles, her applause, her love. Grief because I had promised myself my children would never feel that emptiness, and yet tonight they had. I remembered another wound, one I rarely let myself think about. I was 16, old enough to notice everything, but still too young to fight back. My parents had bought my sibling a brand new car for his birthday. I stood there watching him tear the wrapping paper off the keys, his face glowing, while my father patted him on the back. Later that week, when I asked if I could borrow the family car just to get to a friend's house, my father sneered, "You're too irresponsible. You'll ruin it. Stop asking for things you don't deserve." I walked to my friend's house in the rain that night, drenched and humiliated. And now, decades later, when I saw my children's toys stuffed into boxes as if they didn't matter, when I saw them banished to the basement, I realized this wasn't just about favoritism, it was about cruelty. It was about control. It was about reminding me that in their eyes, I, and now my children, would never be enough. Tears stung my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly. I couldn't let my children see me break. I couldn't let them think this was the truth. I needed them to know their worth. Even if my parents never did, I walked quietly into their room that night, long after they had fallen asleep. The moonlight spilled across their faces, peaceful at last. I brushed my daughter's hair back from her forehead and whispered, "You are everything, you are loved. Don't you ever forget that?" I kissed my son's small hand, still clutching his stuffed animal, and whispered, "You are more than enough, you always will be." Then I sat in the dark, staring at their sleeping faces, and made another silent vow. I will not let my parents steal their light the way they stole mine. I will not let this house become their prison like it was mine. They think they can erase my children's place, but they're wrong. They're so wrong. The memories wouldn't stop that night. They kept rolling in, each one like a dagger reopening old wounds. The family dinners where my sibling got the biggest portion and I got scraps. The holidays where he was showered with gifts and I got socks. The countless times I heard, "Why can't you be more like him?" Until I started asking myself the same thing in the mirror. But the worst wound of all wasn't the neglect, it wasn't the favoritism, it was the silence when I cried, the silence when I begged for their attention, the silence that told me over and over again, "You don't matter." That silence shaped me, it broke me, and I swore to myself that I would never let it touch my children. But tonight, seeing their tears, I realized I had been wrong to think I could keep them safe under this roof. I had trusted my parents. I had believed maybe, just maybe, they would treat my children differently. I thought being grandparents might soften them, make them kinder, make them see. But no, the cruelty ran too deep. The cycle was still alive, and I knew then, as surely as I knew the sun would rise the next morning, that something had to change. Because if I didn't stop this now, if I didn't fight back, then my children would grow up with the same wounds I carry to this day. They would grow up questioning their worth, doubting their value, and wondering why love always seemed out of reach. And I refused to let that happen. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding with old pain and new determination, and whispered the words I once wished someone had said to me. You deserve better. You are better. And one day, they will see just how strong you are. That was the night the past came alive again. That was the night the old scars bled fresh. And that was the night I realized my parents hadn't just betrayed me. They had declared war on my children. And I would fight. Oh, I would fight. They thought moving my kids' things to the basement was the end of the story. But what they didn't know was that it was only the beginning. I still remember that night as vividly as though it were burned into my skin. The house was too quiet, except for the muffled sobs of my children coming from their new bedroom, the basement. My parents had moved their toys and bedding down there without even consulting me. My babies, who once ran joyfully through the upstairs halls, were now crying themselves to sleep beside boxes of old furniture, the smell of dampness hanging in the air. I sat on the edge of my bed, fists clenched, heart racing. My parents' words replayed in my mind like a poisonous chant. The golden grandson deserves the best rooms. Every syllable cut me deeper. Their decision wasn't just about rooms. It was a declaration. It told my children, loud and clear, you don't matter as much as he does. And that was the moment something inside me snapped. For years, I had tried to justify their behavior. I told myself maybe I was overreacting, maybe favoritism was just a small thing that didn't matter. I swallowed my pride when they praised my nephew while ignoring my kids. I endured when they compared me to my brother, when they minimized every achievement of my children, and when they laughed off their tears. But this was a line I could not allow them to cross. I walked downstairs and saw my daughter clutching her stuffed animal like it was the only safe thing in the world. My son asked me, Mom, why do Grandma and Grandpa love him more than us? And that question broke me into pieces I didn't know how to gather. Because how could I answer honestly without shattering their innocence? How could I explain that their grandparents were willing to humiliate them just to elevate another child? I hugged them tightly, kissed their hair, and promised, this won't be forever. I'm going to fix this. But inside, my thoughts were a storm. I couldn't let this go, not anymore. My kids needed me to stand up for them, to protect them, to show them they mattered. They needed to know that no matter what the world, or even their grandparents, said they were not second-class children. That night, after they finally fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off and planned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to beg my parents for approval. I wasn't going to make excuses for their cruelty. Instead, I was going to make them face what they had done, and I was going to take back the power they had stolen from me since I was a child. The plan started small. I would confront them, not just about the basement, but about everything, the favoritism, the dismissiveness, the way they had always made me and my kids feel invisible. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized confrontation alone wasn't enough. My parents had spent years dismissing my words, twisting my pain into accusations of being too sensitive. If I just yelled at them, they'd brush it off like always. So no, I needed something stronger, something undeniable. I decided to gather proof. Every cruel comment, every slight, every unfair act, I began writing it all down day by day. I took photos of the basement where my children slept, compared to the decorated upstairs rooms given to my nephew. I even recorded a conversation with my mother when she said, almost casually, it's only natural to give the best to the child who will carry the family name. That sentence became my fuel, but still, revenge wasn't enough. My children's hearts needed more than my anger. They needed protection, so my plan grew bigger. I began looking into new housing options, a place where my kids would never have to feel like outsiders in their own home. I researched schools, parks, and communities. I wanted to build them a life where they were celebrated, not overlooked. And quietly, I began preparing for the day when my parents would discover the strength they had underestimated. It was strange. I almost felt calm. because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving their cruelty. I was fighting back. I thought about my kids' faces the night they were pushed into the basement, tears staining their cheeks. And I vowed never again. They thought they could take away my children's dignity. They thought they could break me with the same chains they'd used my whole life. But what they didn't know was that I had finally reached my breaking point, and instead of shattering, I was sharpening. And so the plan began, quiet, steady, unstoppable. A plan to show my parents that their golden grandson wasn't the only child who deserved love, respect, and space in the family. A plan to reclaim my voice. A plan to remind them that their daughter, the one they underestimated all her life, was about to become the storm they never saw coming. The next morning, I didn't wake up as the same woman who had cried quietly in the kitchen the night before. I woke up as someone transformed, angry, yes, but also focused. The plan was in motion, and today I was going to take the first step. I walked past the basement door on my way to the kitchen, and I heard my kids stirring. My daughter's small voice floated up, "Do you think Grandma will let us back upstairs today?" My son's answer, wary and resigned, "No, he's their favorite now." That was it. The last crack of mercy I might have had for my parents was shattered. When my parents came down the stairs, cheerful and chatty, as if nothing was wrong, I stopped them in the hallway. My mother tried to breeze past me with a smile. "Breakfast will be ready soon, dear," but I held up my hand. "No," I said firmly. "We're not pretending today." They both froze. My father arched an eyebrow, like he always did when I dared to speak with authority, the same look that used to shrink me into silence. But I wasn't shrinking anymore. We need to talk now. We sat in the living room, the same room that had become a shrine to my nephew, photos of him at every angle, trophies polished and displayed. While my children's pictures gathered dust in a forgotten corner, I started calmly. "Last night, my kids cried themselves to sleep in the basement. The basement, because you decided they weren't as worthy of the upstairs rooms as your precious grandson." My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my phone. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. It's only natural to give the best to the child who will carry the family name. The silence that followed was sharp, heavy, suffocating. My father cleared his throat. "You're taking things out of context." "Out of context?" I snapped. "My children are sleeping next to moldy boxes because you've decided they don't measure up." Do you know what my son asked me last night? He asked me why his grandparents loved someone else more than him. Explain to me, Dad, how a child that age should even have to wonder that. They exchanged a look, the same silent communication they had used my whole life to stand united against me. But this time I didn't back down. "You've been playing this game for years." I continued, my voice shaking but loud. "Favoritism. Comparisons making me feel small, making my kids feel invisible. But I'm done. I'm not your punching bag, and my children are not your second-class citizens." My mother's face tightened. "We've given you everything. A roof, food, support." I laughed bitterly. "Support you call moving my kids to the basement support? You call decades of telling me I'd never be as good as my brother's support? And then, for the first time in my life, I said it, you broke me. You spent years making me feel unworthy, and I let it happen. But when you started breaking them, my children, that's when everything changed. Because I won't let you do to them what you did to me." Their composure cracked then. My father's voice rose, thunderous. "You will not disrespect us in our own house?" I stood tall. "Then maybe it's time I leave your house?" The room went silent. My mother gasped. My father's face turned red. "You wouldn't survive without us," he sneered. I smiled, a smile that held every ounce of strength I'd gained in my suffering. "Watch me," and in that moment, I revealed the rest of my plan. I told them about the photos I had taken of the basement, the recordings of their words, The documented list of every time they had treated my children unfairly. I told them I was ready to walk out and build a life for my kids far away from their cruelty. You think you hold the power here? I said softly, but the truth is, you only hold what I've allowed you to, and I'm done allowing it. My parents looked at me with shock, with fury, with disbelief. But underneath it all, I saw something else flicker in their eyes for the very first time, fear, because they realized I wasn't bluffing. The fallout began immediately. My mother burst into tears, wailing about how ungrateful I was, how I was destroying the family. My father shouted about respect and loyalty, the same empty words he'd used to control me for decades. But none of it worked. Not anymore. I packed my bags that afternoon. I told my children to gather their favorite toys, their clothes, and their drawings from school. My daughter asked me timidly, "Are we leaving?" And I knelt, held her hands, and said, "Yes, sweetheart, we're going somewhere we can be happy." When my parents saw the suitcases, their panic escalated. They begged, they threatened, they tried to guilt me. But I kept moving. "You had a chance," I told them quietly. "You could have loved all your grandchildren equally. You could have been the kind of parents I once dreamed you'd be, but you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." And then, with my children's small hands tucked safely in mine, we walked out of that house. The slam of the door behind us didn't just close out the sound of my parents shouting. It closed out years of silence, pain, and humiliation. For the first time, I felt free. But freedom comes with consequences. Word spread fast in the family. Some relatives sided with my parents, calling me dramatic. Others whispered that they admired me, but didn't dare say it aloud. My brother, of course, gloated. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that my kids no longer cried themselves to sleep in a basement. What mattered was that they saw their mother stand tall, unbroken, and deep down knew the confrontation was only the beginning. The real fallout had just begun. The first few weeks after we left were rough. I won't sugarcoat it. Packing up and walking away is one thing, but waking up in a cramped rental apartment with boxes stacked to the ceiling, wondering how you'll keep the lights on, that's another story. My kids had to adjust too. They missed the big backyard, the familiar walls, even the creak of the stairs in my parents' house. But what they didn't miss was the constant sting of being treated like they didn't matter. And that difference, it was everything. I got up earlier than ever, pushed myself harder at work, and picked up extra hours. Every dollar I earned was a brick in the foundation of our new life. My kids saw it too. They watched their mom hustle, and they knew it was for them. The basement had broken their hearts, but now they had windows in their bedrooms, posters on the walls, and little lamps they picked out themselves. My daughter painted her room with stars and moons. My son lined his shelf with superhero figures. They weren't big rooms, but they were theirs. And that sense of belonging, that feeling of being valued, made them glow. Meanwhile, my parents kept calling. At first, it was daily. My mother would sob into the phone. "How could you do this to us? Do you know what people are saying?" My father's voice would cut in, sharp and cold, demanding I bring the children over, insisting that I was poisoning them against their grandparents. But here's the truth: I didn't have to poison anything. They had already revealed themselves. My children remembered the basement, the words, the favoritism. They had their scars, small but real. I never screamed back, never begged, never argued. I just let the silence answer them. Every ignored call was a reminder that I no longer played their game. And slowly, word of mouth began to do what I couldn't. My relatives, curious as ever, started asking questions. Why weren't the kids around anymore? Why did my parents suddenly look so nervous at family gatherings? My brother, ever the golden child, tried to spin a tale about me being ungrateful, but people noticed the cracks. They noticed my children were missing. They noticed me holding my head higher when I walked into church, no longer shrinking in their shadow. That was the revenge. Not loud, not explosive, but undeniable. Living well, Healing, building something better for my children. It was the sharpest blade I could ever wield. I posted small glimpses of our life online, not out of vanity, but out of pride. Pictures of my kids baking cookies, laughing at the park, my daughter holding up a certificate from school, and my son scoring his first soccer goal. And I knew my parents saw them. I knew they scrolled through those images at night, realizing that joy bloomed even without their presence, maybe because of their absence. The truth was, my kids were thriving. They weren't being measured against a cousin. They weren't being shoved aside for the golden grandson. They were allowed to shine on their terms, to be celebrated simply for being who they were. And my parents, well, their house grew quieter. They had my nephew, sure, but it wasn't the same, because favoritism is a poison. It spoils even the one it favors. My nephew grew entitled, restless, demanding. I heard whispers from relatives that he snapped at them, that he took for granted the very pedestal they had built for him. It was the first time I realized maybe my parents hadn't given him a gift at all. Maybe they had cursed him with expectations too high, love too conditional, and adoration too blinding. As months passed, my kids and I created new traditions. Friday night pizza on the couch, Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday walks in the park. Small things but ours, things no one could take away or belittle. The best part? My children stopped asking why their grandparents didn't love them the same. They stopped comparing. Instead, they looked to me. They saw a mom who refused to bow, who chose them over approval, who taught them, without speeches, that love is measured in actions, not in empty words. That's what they learned from the basement, and that's what they carried into our new life. But here's the thing about subtle revenge. It's never quite enough for people like my parents. They couldn't stand the silence, couldn't stand being cut off, couldn't stand watching from a distance as we built something they weren't a part of. And that's when they made their next move. Months turned into nearly a year. The distance between us had solidified, yet my parents' pride wouldn't allow them to admit they were wrong. Instead, they turned to the oldest, dirtiest weapon in their arsenal, gossip. I started hearing it first through whispers at church. A woman I barely knew leaned over after the service and said, "I'm so sorry you're going through such a rebellious phase. Parents only want what's best." At first, I didn't even understand, but then it became clear. My parents were painting me as an ungrateful daughter, a selfish mother, someone who ripped the family apart because I couldn't accept that life wasn't fair. They left out the basement, the tears, the way my children were discarded like old furniture. To the outside world, they looked like doting grandparents denied access to their beloved grandchildren. The truth was twisted, rewritten, and packaged with sugar on their tongues. The hardest part wasn't hearing the lies. It was watching my kids begin to pick up the tension. My son once asked me, "Mom, did we do something bad? Is that why Grandma and Grandpa don't want us anymore?" It shattered me. Every ounce of anger I had toward my parents ignited again, hotter than before. Because they weren't just hurting me anymore. They were digging into the innocence of my children, planting doubt in the very soil I'd been trying so hard to make fertile with love. So I decided I wasn't going to stay silent forever. Subtle revenge had worked for a while, but some things demanded a louder answer. I invited my parents to meet, not at their home, not at mine, but in a neutral place, a coffee shop downtown. They arrived stiff, guarded, my father's eyes narrowed, my mother's lips pressed into a tight line. They didn't hug me. They didn't even say my name. I looked at them across that little wooden table and said the words I had been carrying for months. "You don't get to lie about me anymore. You don't get to make my children feel unwanted. I may have been your daughter first, but I'm their mother now, and my loyalty belongs to them." My father scoffed. "So dramatic? We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" But I didn't flinch, not this time. My voice didn't shake. "You gave me everything except the one thing that mattered, respect. And you tried to take that from my children too. That ends here. They tried to argue, tried to twist it again, but I didn't stay for the show. I stood up, dropped a few dollars on the table for the untouched coffee, and walked out. That night, I sat my kids down and told them the truth in words they could understand. Grandma and Grandpa made a choice. They chose to treat someone else better than you, and that wasn't fair. It wasn't your fault, and it never will be. My daughter cried softly, but then she looked at me with the kind of resolve only children can have. It's okay, Mom, we have you. That was all I needed to hear. From that day on, I stopped caring about their whispers, their stories, their narrative. If people wanted to believe them, let them. I had no interest in defending myself anymore. The people who mattered, my children, knew the truth. And those who cared could see it shining in the way my kids thrived, the way they laughed freely, the way they didn't carry the weight of favoritism anymore. But the revenge, the real revenge, came slowly, because as time passed, the golden grandson started showing cracks. He grew arrogant, cruel even, the weight of constant pedestal worship making him entitled. He sneered at my parents, demanded more, never satisfied, and when they looked at him, I saw it. The flicker of doubt, the realization that maybe they'd chosen wrong, maybe they had built their kingdom on sand, maybe they had lost something they could never get back. That was my revenge, not a scream, not a courtroom, not even a slammed door. It was the quiet collapse of the empire they had built while my children and I stood strong, hand in hand, walking forward. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't fire. It's watching the people who hurt you sit in the ashes of their own choices. Years later, I sometimes find myself looking back at that day when I came home to my children crying on the basement floor. It feels like a scar that will never completely fade, but over time, I've realized scars aren't just reminders of pain, they're proof of survival. Proof that you walked through fire and came out the other side, still standing, still breathing, still able to love. For a long time, I thought revenge meant punishing them, making them feel what I felt. I used to play scenarios in my head, shouting matches, courtroom battles, even the satisfaction of cutting them off so completely they'd beg for forgiveness on their knees. But life taught me something different. The truest revenge wasn't about burning bridges. It was about building my own home on stronger ground, one they could never touch, one where my children could thrive without waiting for scraps of love from people too blind to give it. And when I watch my kids now, when I see the way they've grown, the way they carry themselves, I know I made the right choice. They're kind, resilient, and strong in ways I wasn't at their age, because they didn't just learn about loyalty or respect from what I told them. They learned it from what I showed them. That even when the people closest to you betray your trust, you have the power to choose who you become in the aftermath. My parents still live in their house. They still dote on their golden grandson, still play the part of doting grandparents to the outside world. But I don't envy them anymore. Because behind those closed doors, I know the truth. I know the golden boy they chose above everyone else doesn't fill the emptiness they tried to hide. And I know deep down when they look at me from across a room and see the life I built without them, a part of them wonders, was it worth it? Was he worth losing us? But that's not my question to answer. That's theirs. What I learned and what I want you to hear if you've carried wounds like mine is that family isn't just about blood. It isn't just about last names or traditions. Family is about who shows up for you when the world is heavy. It's about who chooses you when they don't have to. It's about loyalty, kindness, and love that doesn't come with strings attached. Sometimes the people who should love us the most fail us the hardest, and that hurts in ways that words can barely touch. But you are not defined by their failures. You're defined by what you choose to do with the hurt. Do you pass it on? Do you let it grow like poison? Or do you cut it out, heal around it, and grow stronger because of it? I chose to grow stronger. I chose to protect my children, even when it meant walking away from the people who gave me life. And it wasn't easy, it wasn't clean, it wasn't even fair, but it was necessary. Because when you stand up for yourself, when you draw that line in the sand, you teach your children and yourself that love should never feel like begging. There are nights I still dream about my childhood, about the little girl who wanted nothing more than to be chosen. I want to go back and tell her, one day you'll stop waiting for them to see you. One day you'll create your place in the world where you are seen fully, completely. And if you're listening to this and you've felt that same ache, that ache of never being enough for the people who should have loved you most, I want you to know something. You are enough. You always were. Sometimes revenge is nothing more than silence. Sometimes it's walking away. And sometimes it's the smile on your child's face when they look at you and know they are safe, they are wanted, they are loved without condition. That's the revenge I chose. That's the life I chose. And when I think about the future, when I imagine my children grown, raising families of their own, I hope they never question their worth. I hope they never have to untangle themselves from a family that claimed to love them while breaking them down. I hope they carry with them the lessons we fought so hard to learn. That love is action, not just words. That respect isn't optional. That loyalty is priceless. Maybe my parents will never understand. Maybe they'll cling to their version of the story until the end. But it doesn't matter anymore, because the truth is carved in the lives of my children, in the laughter we share, in the peace of a home where no one is ever sent to the basement. That is my closure. That is my victory. That is my revenge. And if you are standing where I once stood, brokenhearted and betrayed by the very people you thought would protect you, hear me. You don't have to wait for their apology. You don't have to wait for their recognition. You don't have to keep shrinking yourself to fit into the mold of their expectations. You can walk away. You can heal. You can build something better, because in the end, family isn't about who raised you. It's about who lifts you. And sometimes the strongest families are the ones we create with our own hands, with our own choices, with the people who choose us back. So don't waste your life waiting to be chosen. Choose yourself. Choose peace. Choose the people who choose you. That's not just revenge. That's freedom. And when you find that freedom, when you finally stop begging for scraps and start living in abundance, you'll understand what I mean when I say this: the best revenge is happiness. Thank you for listening to my story. For more emotional and real-life family stories, click here and subscribe to our channel.